Hi there, I'm Dave Taylor, and I thought I'd give you a little tour of the Booth family plot here in Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore. If you ever come to Greenmount and you'd like to visit the Booth family, it's pretty easy to find them. Once you come in the main gate, you're going to hang a right, follow the road, and it's going to keep curving around until you get to an area right like this. It has a little sign that says the Dogwood area. That's where they're buried. There's a big mausoleum right here, and there's actually a little area where you can park if you want to. And then you'll find this little sidewalk here that you're going to just walk down, as I'm going to do, and we are going to go visit the Booth family plot. Now, most of the members of the Booth family are buried here. Not all of them. Two of the sons, Edwin and Junius Brutus Booth Jr., are both buried in Massachusetts in separate cemeteries, but the bulk of the Booth clan is buried here in Baltimore. Now, originally, they were not all interred here, so this is the edge of the Booth family plot. Not all of the Booths were buried here originally. In fact, the first of the Booths to die was John Wilkes Booth's grandfather, Richard Booth, whose grave is right here. And he passed away in 1839. Now, Richard was originally buried in Baltimore Cemetery, along with also later when Junius Brutus Booth, the patriarch and the noted Shakespearean actor. The reason this obelisk really is here is for him, in his memory, in his honor. In fact, the Booth name is, of course, also has a portrait of Junius carved into the stone and a little inscription about him. Junius was the next one of the elder Booths to die when he died in 1852. And he was also buried in Baltimore Cemetery. But in 1869, Edwin Booth received his brother's body after his brother John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln and decided to put the whole family together here at Greenmount Cemetery. And after that, most of the Booth members who passed away were buried here. So Junius Brutus Booth, this is his headstone, along with his wife Mary Ann, who outlived him by many years, dying in 1885. Their grave is right in front of the obelisk, along with their footstone, which is very common back then to have footstones. And you can see that their initials are also on this footstone, Mary Ann Booth and Junius Brutus Booth. And so this is the main obelisk, which more is for Junius, but it also contains the names of his children, most of them anyway. But this is where it says Junius Brutus Booth. On this side, born May 1st, 1796. And if we just rotate around, on this side, it gives his date of death, November 30th, 1852. And so the obelisk is mostly for him, except that the backside does contain a carving in memory of his children, him and Mary Ann's children. So it says, to the memory of the children of Junius Brutus and Mary Ann Booth. And the top name you'll see on there is actually John Wilkes. And so most people say, oh, there's nothing in the Booth family plot about John Wilkes Booth, but there is. His name is on this obelisk, along with the names of other young Booth children who died at young age: Frederick, Elizabeth, Mary Ann, Henry Byron, and then his youngest brother, Joseph Adrian Booth, who actually lived the longest of all the Booth siblings. And he actually is buried here as well with his own gravestone. So probably what happened is he died in 1902, and here's his grave right here. He became a doctor later in life, so this is his grave. So he died in 1902, the last of the Booth siblings to pass away. But his wife, Cora, outlived him by quite a few years. She was also 30 years younger than he was. And so it's likely that after Joseph died, Cora decided to add Joseph's name to the list of children, perhaps not realizing that mostly this was a marker for the children who had no markers of their own, because Frederick, Elizabeth, Mary Ann, and Henry Byron died some in infancy, some as just young children, and they are actually buried. Their bodies were disinterred from their original burial spot at Tudor Hall, the Booth family farm, or in John Wilkes Booth's case, the government gave it back, and they were all interred right here, unmarked, at the base of the obelisk, behind the obelisk, so to speak. So this is kind of the back of the Booth monument. And so this is where those children were buried. And the story is that John Wilkes Booth is also located here, and buried behind this obelisk. One of the other stones I kind of quickly went through here, this one here, people get confused because it says Edwin Booth on it. And they're like, oh, Edwin, the famous Shakespearean actor, he was one of them. But if you notice, it says the son of Joseph Booth. And so this is Cora. This is their infant son, who sadly did not live very long. So this is not Edwin Booth, the noted Shakespearean actor and the brother of John Wilkes Booth, but this is actually would have been his nephew. The other graves that are here in this plot, there's Joseph's footstone. Again, very common, wealthy. You have a footstone. There's his initials, Joseph Adrian Booth. And another one of the Booth siblings buried here is Rosalie Booth. She was the oldest daughter. She kind of kept out of the limelight. She didn't do anything really out in the public eye. Her family was very wealthy and could take care of her. She died in 1889 at the age of 65. And so she is buried here. She, of course, also has a footstone, Rosalie Ann Booth. And then the other one who is buried here is John Wilkes Booth's sister, Asia Booth. And you can see right here, it says Asia, in memory of Asia, wife of John S. Clark, John Sleeper Clark, who was an actor. And so Asia, after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln at her brother's hands, left the United States and went to England and never came back, at least never alive. And after she passed, she was brought here and buried next to her father and her mother and her siblings who joined her later on. Now, the trickiest part here at Greenmount is everyone then looks at this stone that's in the corner of the plot. And when I got here, this stone was covered with pennies. And in fact, if I go a little bit closer, you can see the pennies in the grass, that there are still just a boatload of pennies kind of scattered throughout the grass here. So many people come here and they put pennies on this thinking this must be the unmarked gravestone of John Wilkes Booth. Well, if you were paying attention earlier in the video, you know that it's not. This is Asia's footstone. Yes, it seems strange because her name on this stone is facing the sidewalk here, but she is actually laid out in this direction, just like her parents laid out in this direction, and her sister over there. So they each have a footstone. Rosalie has her footstone, her parents have their footstone, and this is Asia's footstone. Now, it doesn't have her initials on it, which is probably what causes a lot of confusion by well-meaning visitors who think, oh, it's unmarked. They put an unmarked grave here for John Wilkes Booth. Nothing of the kind. This is Asia's just plain footstone to go with where she is buried right here. Headstone, footstone. And then we also have the corner lot, which probably was intended maybe to be used by Edwin Booth or Junius Brutus Booth Jr., who, as I said in the beginning, were instead buried in different cemeteries in Massachusetts. And so this is the Booth family plot. Feel free to come and visit at Greenmount Cemetery. Also buried in this cemetery are two of John Wilkes Booth's conspirators, Samuel Arnold and Michael O'Laughlin, who were boyhood friends who took part in the kidnapping, but were not involved in the assassination, but still were sent to prison for it, and one of which, Michael O'Laughlin, died in prison from yellow fever. But that's a whole nother story. But I invite you definitely to come to Greenmount Cemetery, check out the Booth family plot and many of the other historical people buried here, and just know that John Wilkes Booth does indeed rest here. He was cornered, killed, his body released to the family in 1869. They had a funeral, and they buried him right about there behind the obelisk here at Greenmount Cemetery. This is Dave Taylor, signing off.